I've worked security on and off for several years to supplement my income, so I've heard quite a few creepy stories from coworkers. Probably the most legitimately scary story I've heard was from a guard that was working in a closed-down arena. The building is more than 100 years old, but hasn't been used since the early 2000s. The city is keeping up with basic maintenance as it waits for a buyer. There's usually only one guard assigned to the building. It's a 6,000-seat arena, with a huge basement and 2 additional floors that have lots of old office spaces, dressing rooms, and a separate, smaller community theater-type stage upstairs. The building itself is very interesting, as it's largely unchanged since the heydays of the 70s and 80s. The upper floors are largely dark and pretty creepy. So the usual guard is doing his rounds through the building, but feels unnaturally creeped out. It's his normal post, but something feels different today. He's feeling jumpy, but shakes it off and continues. He's a very diligent guy, so he walks every floor of the building. He makes his way to the very top of the catwalk system above the main arena, where the old spotlighting equipment was. It's a narrow, wooden catwalk system. Suddenly, he hears a loud creak behind him, like someone is walking. He spins around and sees a guy standing there. The guy is frozen in mid-stride, like he's been tiptoeing up behind him. The guy had an unsettling, mischievous-looking smile on his face, like he'd been caught with his hand in a cookie jar. He had a big steel pipe in his hand. The guard pulled his gun, and the guy took off running in the opposite direction and disappeared into the labyrinth of the building. The cops came and swept the place with a canine, but didn't find him. They did find that he had been playing in the dust on top of the old concession counters. He had written a bunch of bizarre, helter-skelter type unsettling rhymes, and drew a bunch of stick figures hanging from nooses. The speculation is it was some crazy homeless guy that had been hiding in the building for a few days, and had made a game of following the guards without them knowing it. I got to see the writing still on the counters last time I was there. I was working for the day in a government building I hadn't visited before. Our company had 1 floor in it, and I was told that was the last floor in use. The company were planning to vacate at the end of the year. At lunchtime, I decided to explore and got off the elevator on a random floor. It was an open-plan office. All the desks still had work on them, and a large table still had the remains of a party. Paper plates and food. A lot of the desks had slices of cake which sat on them untouched. A party banner was up that said, "Congratulations." One office was open, and the walls were covered with X-ray slides of different people. Every surface covered, with more on the floor. To my untrained eye, they all seemed to have large shadows growing in them. And this was years before social media or camera phones, so I just had another quick look around and got back to the elevator. When the doors opened on my floor, I was met by an armed police officer. This was London, and seeing an armed cop was very rare. He asked me why I'd been on the other floor. I told him I was just curious and on my lunch break, and he warned me that I was only allowed access to this floor, and to not break protocol again. No one in the office I was visiting knew anything about it. No one had ever seen police there or ever explored the other floors. I worked in a hospital pharmacy where it was just me and one other running it for the whole hospital. We'd like to turn off like 80% of the lights because hospital lights can be so offending to the eyes, especially during hours your body would normally want to sleep. Well, I came into the pharmacy after delivering something, and I saw my coworker in the medication pick area, which was enclosed and only had one way in or out. As I was talking to him about something that had happened on the floor, watching him look over the medications, I heard my coworker go, "What?" And I saw him poke his head out from all the way in the back of the pharmacy. When I looked back, there wasn't anyone in the med-pick area. I 100% saw someone standing there and talked to them for a few minutes. That pharmacy was located in the basement, along with the morgue. What's more, the pharmacy is kept locked. Only pharmacy employees have access to it. Not even security does. I used to work as a tour guide for a ghost tour company. Basically, I walked people through the city, stopped at important landmarks, and told gruesome stories about what happened and the reported hauntings. Creepy things would happen, like guests seeing faces peering out of windows, or telling me they could see lights floating in windows. It was always the same window, and multiple guests from multiple tours over a 2-year period reported seeing them. The creepiest thing that happened to me was while I was working my last day. I was standing in front of the door to a house with plenty of ghost stories. This was also the house with the lights. At the end of my story, I thanked the guests and told them that this would be my final tour with the company. Everyone clapped, and I started to make my way down the steps. As I started to walk, I heard a voice whisper behind me. Before I could turn around to look, I felt a pair of hands shove me from behind, and I went butt over tea kettle down the stairs. Luckily, one of the guests caught me as I was falling. Some of the guests assumed that me falling down the stairs and saying I felt pushed with no one behind me was part of the tour. Great job, great tips, and a wild last tour. I work in a cemetery. One evening, I had stayed late to do some catch-up work. I was taking pictures of some granite samples to have on my phone and had already locked up for the night. As I was holding my phone, I heard the doorway to the basement swing open, slam shut, and heard footsteps go down the stairs. I froze in place. I thought for sure someone had come in. I called out to see if it was someone from maintenance, but received no reply. I got scared because if it wasn't them, then someone had broken in. I stayed still for a little while and just listened, then called out again. Finally, I got brave enough to look. No one there. I peeked down the basement, empty, and all the doors were still locked. My dad had a job going around and checking schools to make sure everything was properly alarmed and locked down during summer breaks. He had about 15 to 20 schools on his list, and would try to bang them all out in an evening so he could have the next few days off. He told me that one of the schools was a Catholic elementary school, very run down and old, and it always gave him the creeps. There was a room in there that had a big Virgin Mary statue, and it made him feel uncomfortable whenever he'd check in there, so he never spent much time hanging around in that room. The last year he did that as a job, he inspected the statue more closely and discovered that it was actually hollow. This was presumably so that it could be moved around more easily, but the eyes had small drill holes in them. Hypothetically, someone could hide inside and watch people without them knowing. To this day, he speculates that that was what was happening when he'd be in there. Kinda far out there if you asked me, but it's still creepy as heck to consider. Another user responds, "Oh wow, that just unlocked a memory. It's not security guard related, but a friend of mine moved into a rental, and one of the rooms in the basement was covered in torn up Bible pages. They were taped to every inch of the wall, except for 2 peepholes facing into the next room. The words, 'Whistlin' Willie is watching you,' was written above the peepholes. There were 2 more holes facing into the bathroom medicine cabinet, with the same thing written inside the cabinet itself. Super unsettling to find when you're helping someone move in." Fresh out of college, I got a job in Cambridge, Massachusetts, or so they said, as an architect designing whatever. I ended up doing oil rigs, and one beautiful morning there were sharks going under the main platform like always. But there were also 2 dead sharks, and the next morning 3 new dead, then 4 the next day, then a steady 4 or 5 a day for a week or 2. They would float up under the see-through deck that looked much like a metal coalander. The crew would have to punch them down with a large pole so the current would catch them. What made it really weird was they looked like they had had heart attacks or died in their sleep. No marks or bites or anything. The guys on the rig had all kinds of theories. Then, one morning, while in a room that was completely submerged and had a beautiful view as we sat in a meeting, everyone got to see the reason the sharks were dying, as if we were viewing it on a movie screen. This octopus had made itself a home between the base and the deck. A shark was swimming by in a cruising fashion, and we see these tentacles grab it right in front of the glass and snap it like a glow stick. The marine biologist smiled and said, "The octopus is literally doing that to entertain itself, just because it can." The marine biologist lowered a dive camera, and this octopus was huge. The crew would joke about it thereafter. People would smoke on the deck at night and say, "Don't let the octopus in." Seeing those tentacles was just insane for their length. And to think about how a shark is mostly muscle and the octopus could just snap them was kinda scary. I was a security guard at an old folks' home that was essentially 2 buildings with a smaller building between them that acted as a lobby. One building was for assisted living, and the other was for palliative care. I was in charge of doing security checks of every floor, including the boiler room and basement. One night, I took the elevator down to the basement and hit the light switch, walking down the hall toward the boiler room. About halfway there, the lights started shutting off at the ballast, one after the other. Normally, I'm not in any way afraid of the dark, but on this particular night, I started a mad dash back to the elevator before the lights went off completely, because there were no windows in this basement, and I would have been left in total darkness. In the process of running, I realized that the elevator had lost power as well, so I got to just stand there in the pitch-black darkness until someone upstairs got everything back on again. All in all, I spent 23 minutes down there in the dark. 0 out of 10. Would not recommend. My mom used to work security at a site of an old factory that was due to be demolished and turned into a new housing development. All the guards, including my mom, reported hearing sounds of people talking while on patrol, but whenever they arrived at the place they thought the voices were coming from, there would be no one there. One night, my mom arrived for her shift, and the guard she was relieving ran out the door the second she arrived. My mom ran after him and caught up with him at his car. He was visibly shaking, and he told her that he heard the voices again, but this time he saw what looked like a man and a woman on their smoke break chatting. He approached them to ask what they were doing, and both disappeared when he got to within 15 feet of them. The guard refused to go back to that site afterwards, and was transferred to another one. I was on the night shift working at a small boutique hotel that had previously been a very shady truck stop style motel, AIDS hospice, and generally unseemly place. During the night shift, the only people on staff were myself and the bartenders, who worked on the other side of the property. The front desk and lobby where I worked were carved out of a couple of rooms in the largest of the property's buildings. The back office area was a room that opened directly into the lobby, and then through a door in the back was a small room with a desk and bathroom in it. On this night, the front desk area, which was always cold, kept heating up with this hot, stuffy air. The AC unit was right outside the office door, and I could hear it running. The temperature gauge in the room read in the low 70s, and when I checked the vents, it felt like it was blowing cool. But every once in a while, the hot air would pass through the room. I wasn't too bothered, since ACs act up all the time, and there was an old attic above the rooms that might trap heat, so I just brushed it off. But as the night went on, I started to get really strong feelings of uneasiness. Going in and out of the smaller room with the bathroom, I'd feel like someone was behind me. I'd turn around and, of course, nothing would be there. By the end of my shift, I felt completely unnerved. Between the blasts of heat and the feeling of being watched all night, I couldn't get out of that office fast enough. The next day, when I came into work, I asked my boss if anything weird ever happened in the lobby area. Without skipping a beat, she said, "Oh yeah, there was a fire in here when this place was still a motel." The manager's room was in the back room, and one night he was smoking in bed, fell asleep, and the bed caught fire. He didn't get out and ended up dying in the room. They merged those rooms into this office when they did the renovations to repair it. And that's how I learned the hotel was haunted. I used to have to deal with, interview basically, members of the public on a one-to-one basis. And every so often, this would involve walk-ins off the street. I worked for a citizens' advice-style agency, which helped people with their problems, city taxes, social housing, that sort of thing. I should add that this is the UK. One day, I get the call from the front desk to go down and speak to someone, and there's this young, fairly clean-cut, pretty normal-looking guy. I take him into a side room to hear what he's got to say, and the way the room is set out is so that the desk faces the door and my chair backs onto the wall. So we sit down and I ask him what he's concerned about, and he starts talking. He was making absolutely no sense. Zero intelligible sense, just rambling, word salad crazy talk. I think it may have been about a conspiracy against him, but it was pretty clear I was in the presence of someone suffering from a fairly intense paranoid delusion, and I was just trying to agree with him and stay on his good side. I didn't even try to take it all in. No one could have. I've never been so scared. Terrified would be a better description. It's hard to explain the horror of being basically cornered by someone, with no way out except past him, who has completely lost their grip on reality, and you're just hoping he doesn't decide you're part of the problem. I managed to talk him down and promised to look into it, whatever it was. Basically managed to mollify him enough to usher him back into the lobby and get him to give his details to the front desk before getting him to leave. I remember at that point the cold sweat was making my shirt stick to my back. I left that job a long time ago, but I've never again made the mistake of not giving myself a clear line of escape if things go south. I used to work in a thrift store. Most often, I was tending to the donation door, helping people who came by to drop stuff off. We closed at 9, but after about 7, I was usually the only person back in the donation center. Donations were few and far between at that hour, but I couldn't leave the door unattended. So I'd occupy myself with plenty of busy work organizing the ever-present mess of donations, sweeping the warehouse, or whatever else needed doing. The door where people came to drop off donations was one of those automatic sliding doors that you so often see at stores. And it would open when there was absolutely nothing there to trip the sensor. The phone right by the door would ring from time to time, but when I picked it up, there was never anyone on the other end. There was also a sensor in the driveway that would make a chiming noise in the donation center to let us know when a car was pulling up. And sure enough, that too would go off when nobody was there. All of these systems worked perfectly fine during the daylight hours when other coworkers were around, but after the sun went down and the customers became less frequent, the weirdness started. It wasn't just me either. I'd talked to my other coworkers who often worked the closing shift, and they'd experienced all of this as well. It wasn't uncommon for customers to tell me their donations were the result of cleaning out a recently deceased relative's house. so I'm absolutely convinced there were ghosts all up in that place. Another user responds, I used to work at Goodwill and had all these same experiences at one time or another. Often we managers would get called by the security company in the middle of the night, saying something tripped the motion detector alarms after closing and locking up. I'm with you about the deceased relative thing. I swear certain items just held on to that energy. I used to work at a family entertainment center that included a laser tag facility, among an arcade and other family fun things. I've had lots of experiences. Everyone always talked about the place being haunted, and I never believed it because I don't typically believe in paranormal stuff. Until I started working in the laser tag facility. Now, if you've ever played laser tag, you know it's black lights. So of course, when the black and white lights are off, it's pitch black in there. Like, you can't see your hand in front of your face dark. Of course, we don't play in the dark, but it's important to note. We worked alone at the laser tag section, and were responsible for explaining the rules in Room 1, helping people get vested up in their gear in Room 2, and then had to referee in the arena. So there are 3 different sections to this part of the facility, as well as a small office where I spent a lot of my time. The office was inside Room 2, just across from the area that led to the arena. Also, the arena had back doors that led to the back of the parking lot. These doors remained locked from the inside at all times, but could be used in case of emergency. My first incident was my first night closing alone. One of the laser tag vests, which had been out of order all day, and was 100% properly sitting on the rack, came flying up and over the rack, into the floor and ripping the charger from it, causing the vest to kick on. Scared the absolute crap out of me. The second incident was Halloween 2013. I was working with a coworker on this night because it was so busy. I was in the office checking vest battery levels while my coworker was outside running the register. There were no games going on, so all the rooms were empty. I heard what sounded like someone running up the ramp towards the vesting room, which is also where the office is located, and I looked at the door to the arena, fully expecting it to burst open and have someone run through. Suddenly, the footsteps stopped, and it went silent. Then, there was a loud bang. I jumped and screamed and ran to get my coworker. He opened the door, and we found a shoe on the floor that definitely was not there before. We also never found the other one, so that still bothers me when I think about it. Another incident took place one night when 2 of our regulars were at the facility for their bowling league and their kids wanted to play laser tag. I don't remember their exact ages, but at the time I'd say the girl was about 5 or 6 and the boy was probably 7 or 8. Since it was just the 2 of them, they asked if I'd play too. I agreed and we went into the arena to play. Midway through the game, the girl pops around the corner and I notice her vest is turned off, which can't happen unless it's done by the computer in the office. Then the music stops, so of course I flip out and think the lights are going next. I was so sure someone was in the office who wasn't supposed to be. I ran over and threw the office door open, and saw that the computer had crashed, which had never happened before. I called the kids in to reset the game, and the little girl said she was scared and didn't want to play again. I told them it was okay and that I would refund their parents. I was helping her get the vest off when she said, "Hey, I have a question." I asked what it was, and she asked, "Who was the other guy in there playing with us?" There was no one in there. It was just me and the kids. I told her there wasn't anyone else there, and she said that yes there was, and she could show me. She grabbed my hand, walked me to the door, and opened it. She pointed up the ramp and said, "See? He's right there." I told her I didn't see anything, and she went, "How can you not see him? His hair is glowing."